What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Virzi Effect podcast show. My name is Paul Virzi. You guys listening to episode 523. I believe it's 523. It's 523, 524. It doesn't matter. Either way, you're here. You are listening. And I have a really cool guest on the show. Somebody that I've talked about having on the show for a long time. As you guys know, the things that I love are comedy. I love true crime. And I'm starting to get interested in investments. So my next guest is somebody who has dabbled, so to speak, in all of these worlds. So I actually worked with this guy out in Long Island at Governor's. Very funny comedian, ex-FBI agent. Vinny D'Agostino is on the show. Thank you so much, Vin, for being on, man.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I want to get into this for the listeners and just have them understand the world that you're coming from. You are somebody that graduates college and goes into the criminal. You go into criminal shit, right?
Well, I went to law school after college, so I knew I wanted to go in the FBI probably my senior year of high school, and then.
Wow.
Yeah, I read. I don't know about you, but I read Donnie Brasco's book probably my junior year of high school, and it blew me away. And then probably a year or two before that, I remember being at my uncle's in Staten Island. We were staying there, and I snuck watching Goodfellas, and I was just blown away. Between those two things, I either was going to join the mafia or investigate the mafia. I knew at that point I wanted to be a part of it.
So you knew from that early in your life that, like, going into that life, like the Donnie Brasco book was like, I want to do this.
Yeah, but I was a fuck up. So I wanted to do that, but
Right.
It was completely beyond my range. Like
Right.
Nobody had confidence I would actually pull it off. It was just something that I wanted to do.
Right. You're a kid that's fucking around. You and your friends are getting into trouble. I'm sure you were, doing all the shit that we all did, but then you actually go into this thing and you actually become an FBI agent, and you become an FBI agent that was actually investigating the mob. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the way it works is the lawyer thing makes you more attractive to the bureau. They take about a third lawyers, but at the time, being a lawyer wasn't good enough. So I went to law school. I passed the bar. I practiced law for a few years. And while I was practicing, I applied. But I was also doing computer shit on the side because it was a hobby of mine that I picked up on at a young age. My dad worked at IBM. So he was always bringing over these monstrous computers home, and we'd build them and set up networks. Again, it just was a hobby. But by the time I applied to the bureau, this was in 2003, after 9/11, they created the cyber discipline. And so when they added up all that experience I had doing the technology shit on the side, it got me in under cyber and law. And so then you go to the academy, and this is something that I'll it's going to be released later this week. Starting a podcast. The first episode is what's the FBI Academy actually like? It's me and two other guests, a buddy of mine who went through the academy with me, who got fired like halfway through, which was a great story. And I was glad that he was cool enough to speak about it. So you go through the academy, you get sent to a field office, there's 56 field offices. I wanted New York, and I was shocked to learn that on everyone else's list, New York is dead fucking last on everyone's list. Dead last. Nobody wants to come to New York. Isn't that mind blowing though?
So you thought you were going to be on some wait list and like it was going to be tough, and everyone was like, yeah, no problem.
Literally, you rank where you want to go, 1 to 56. And everybody in the class except the 3 idiots from New York. It was me, a guy who was at the DA's office, and someone else. And we're the only 3 idiots that had New York City as one because of the cost of living. Or as a guy from Houston said to me, I heard there's garbage in the streets. And I'm like, yeah, there's definitely garbage in the street. I was like, you don't have garbage in your city streets? Like, what kind of city is that?
Yeah, that's hilarious.
So I get sent to New York, and they, when you get to New York, this shows you the clusterfuckery of the FBI. You would think, based on your skills, that they would send you to like the appropriate squad, right? Except when you get to New York, for some reason, they lose all your information that you've submitted, and they ask you about your background. Well, I didn't want to go to cyber at the time because that was all like kiddie porn and bootleg DVD shit. And I had plenty of both on my computer. Well, the bootleg DVD, not the kiddie porn.
Right.
And I wanted to work organized crime. So I started volunteering when I first landed in New York. You do like a rotation, think of it like a residency. And I started volunteering for the Genovese squad, where a lawyer I used to work with, her husband worked on the Genovese squad in the FBI. And so when I got there, I said, I'd love to volunteer with, scrub work, like going through garbage cans, working wiretaps, which sounds great. It's not, like overnight surveillance. And because of that, then I got drafted to go to the Colombo squad when I finished, which was like that's when I knew I was in the Matrix. When all that stuff started happening, I was like, none of this should be happening. Like now I'm bending reality. Now I'm working on the Colombo squad, which is a big part of Donnie Brasco's book, was his contact with the Colombos.
Wow. So, okay. So hold on a second. Now we got to talk about this. That's really interesting. So scrub work, just so the people know, it's like, would you say it's like the lowest, like you're just anything that you could do? It's almost like the version of getting coffee for a lawyer, like type shit,
or a barker, or an open mic, or an MC at a shitty gig. It's the equivalent of that. It's like, it's still part of it, but you're definitely on the totem pole of things that people want to do. And don't get me wrong, in the beginning, it's still exciting. Like doing surveillance, it gets boring. I've done thousands of surveillances, but the first, 200, you're sitting there with your MP5 machine gun and your vest on, and you're like, I'm going to fucking kill someone today. Like, and then, 100 in, you're peeing in a Gatorade bottle. You can't stay awake. You're like, this fucking sucks. My sciatic nerve is acting up. You're like, this sucks. And so that's the shit that they would tell you to do. Go do an overnight surveillance. So there's a social club on Railroad Avenue in Long Island. It's run by such and such, who's with the Colombo family. Get some photos, shag the tags, grab all the license plates of everyone walking in and out, and then bring that back to the office. And then we'll look through it, who it is, and determine who's going to these clubs. And so you're looking to identify sources that you might want to flip at some point, people that are weak, that, have gambling problems that are associated with the family, but aren't necessarily, people that they would be suspicious of. If you wired them up, they could probably get into a social club or gambling club. And that's the scrub work in the beginning of the case.
All right. So when you're on like Wire, you'll literally be listening to wise guys in a restaurant, just talking, just shooting the shit, having coffee, and you're listening to that.
So there's two types. Yeah. There's the telephonic, which is if we're up on someone's phone. So if the government wants to get into Paul Virzi's phone, they'll have to put together a search warrant that dirties your phone, which shows that you're using that phone for, let's say, gambling business.
Okay.
Right? And how you get that is those low-level sources who maybe took out some bets, sports betting. They're into you for like 20 grand. They'll be like, yeah, Paul Virzi, that's my guy. This is how I place my bets. This is the number I called. He'll record a phone call with you, 2 or 3, that has you talking about that. It's usually in some lame ass code. Like, if you know what they're talking about, it's hysterical listening to wise guys on the phone. Cause they're like, yeah, this weekend I'm looking at, maybe going to see the 1969 Mets, yeah, they look good. Yeah. 69, like, it's all like, well, you're not clearly not talking about the Mets. So that right. If you get up on Paul Virzi's phone, let's say,
yeah,
that shit is piped back to an office. So in this case, it's piped back to 26 Federal Plaza, Manhattan. It's not like the movies where you're in a van, like down the street. That would just be pretty obvious, right? A white van down your street. It's piped back to the office, but we can't listen unless you're actually listening live. So someone has to man that wiretap 24/7, not one person. You'll have a team. So yeah, you'll be listening to like phone calls, and 90% of them are garbage, but it's that 10% of where a meeting happens, or some will deliberately sometimes set it up. So let's say if I'm on your phone, but it's just a dead Title III, there's nothing good happening, I might ask another agent on my squad to go interview you or try to interview you just to see what your reaction is. So you'll say to the agent, I'm not talking to you. And then the first thing you'll do is you'll jump on the phone and call someone who needs to know. So you'll call, your priest, or the guy you report to. So let's say you're a soldier. You'll call your captain and say, hey, did anyone come see you? because that's one of the rules for La Cosa Nostra is you have to let everybody know if law enforcement contacts you, you have to let them know immediately because they want to make sure you're not a rat. And so that'll be something that'll be very interesting to us if you call someone that you report to and say, hey, this agent came by, he was asking about this old homicide. You might get lucky. You know, they don't know anything about that. They're not going to find him. You know, that was that other guy. That wasn't who they think it is. That was that other guy. So you can capture those phone calls, which are little pieces of evidence that later on connect to, you know, much bigger cases.
So let me ask you a question now. This is fascinating, dude. And we're going to get into how you got into comedy. And I do want to talk about Bitcoin because it's something I plan on investing in. And I know you're a crypto guy. But let me ask you this. I'm a guy that's very, very big, Vincent, on. And I mean, literally talking to you I'm talking about two of my favorite things in the world. So, but I love true crime and all of these guys that, you know, they either kidnap people and they fucking hold them in dungeons, or they're serial killers, but in real life they're just like normal. Like you'd actually have a conversation or a cup of coffee with these psychopaths, and it's like you're like, no, not him or not her. Did you guys? I know you were involved in listening to mafia stuff, but was there ever a time where you were with the FBI where it was maybe like a single killer or somebody like a homicide thing that you got or you were?
Yeah, sort of. So I think nothing epitomizes what you just described, the duality of sociopaths, more than Italian organized crime. Italians by nature, we're very charismatic. We have phenomenal senses of humor, almost across the board, and we're very good with people. Italians are very good at reading people. I would say more so than a lot of other backgrounds. I know I'm biased, but it's something I've observed just through my multiple different careers that I've had. Whenever I come across people with similar backgrounds, they usually possess those same qualities, including like my dad with a very good sense of humor. I used to, he was at IBM. I used to see him interact. I mean, he was an off the boat Italian with no education, and he transcended to executive manager at IBM. Yeah, because he was a likable fucking guy. I mean, he was smart, but he was a likable guy. The Italians. So when this was the best part about it. This is where getting into the FBI was something that I was very lucky to get in. I mean, I had a very different background. Like most of the people I work with are very, very straight edge. You know, they're straight A students, always by the book. I came in a little bit like cockeyed, but I was lucky to get it. But once I got there, Italian organized crime was so awesome because when you would go and cooperate somebody. So let's say you've now built up enough things that you think you can go up to somebody and try to convince them to work for the government, with the government, wear a wire. That takes a lot of personal skills. And, you know, a buddy of mine who went to, Brown University, totally book smart, but, he'd be like, so you're going to work for the FBI or we're going to send you to prison for the rest of your fucking, like, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That's not how you ingratiate. And then if the guy flips, you've got to work with him now. That guy's trusting his life to you for the next, could be 2 months, could be 3 years.
Yeah.
And so those people, part of that is letting go of the judgmental side of, this guy's probably killed a bunch of people. You may know for sure he has. Maybe he's even done time for it. And on the surface, you might have zero in common with this person.
This is fascinating. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, these people are so, it's so easy for people like us. It's so easy to get along with them because if you can set aside the fact that they chopped the guy's dick off and set him on fire a few years ago, and you can put that aside, he's a guy you would bring to your house and it would be hysterical. All your friends would love him. All your friends would love him. They'd be like, that guy, I got to see him again. Where can we hang out with him? And you're like, he killed like 3 people. Him. So I loved it because I was comfortable with the idea because I knew I didn't murder anybody, but I knew I was a fuck up as a kid. And that if you talk to my teachers in high school, they probably say, oh, Vinny, you went to prison, right? I knew that there were different parts of me that were all equally valid. You could be a fuck up, but also, do some pretty amazing things. And so when I looked at these guys, I had no problem sort of separating that. And I think my sources always responded to that. I still keep in touch with my sources to this day. I left the Bureau in 2015. They'll still call me to just bullshit. Why? Because it's not that I'm friends with them. It's more like I could see past that. And if you can see past that and not be all judgmental, you can run those sources very effectively, because you're not hung up on the fact that if I'm in a car hanging out with you at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, I'm going to be missing my kid's birthday the next day because I know that you have an important meeting with the underboss, and we're wargaming how that meeting's going to go. I'll sit there for 2 hours in the car with you to make sure you're 100% comfortable that you're going to walk into that meeting prepared. You're not going to get hurt, and that we're going to get some really good information out of it. As opposed to a lot of agents I worked with who'd be like, here's your recording device, pop it before you go in and, try to get what you can get. And then your source is like, that's your guidance. That's the guidance you're giving me. Like,
right.
I don't even know if this is a real fucking meeting. I could be going in to be getting shot or stabbed. They could know that I'm a rat and this is just a total ruse. So for people like us, once you got into the Bureau, you could do really well with source work because other people didn't have those skills.
Wow, man, that is fascinating. So with you, it was never like it would always be like a more organized type thing than just like you guys were never going after or profiling like one killer, were you ever?
No, I mean, organized crime, the cases never ended. So we had guys that had been committing murders. I mean, I fell ass backwards into running a source into Sonny Franzese, who's the was the underboss of the Colombo family. Sonny is a fucking legend. Like if you Google Sonny, Sonny's old school OG gangster that never cooperated with the Bureau, which I actually always loved about him because he was like the last of a dying breed.
You
like
respected it. Yeah.
I respected it to the point where there was this documentary news they did on Sonny that I was a part of. And one of the things I mentioned was that there were times when my source would go, he started out as a driver for Sonny because they served time together in prison in, I think it was Otisville. And then when my source came out, he wasn't a source at the time. He got jammed up again when he got back on the street for drugs and was facing like 20 to life. And when he started cooperating, he started cooperating for the DEA, but the DEA wasn't really making a lot of headway with him. And one night he's at a club here, a famous club out here on Long Island, and the underboss, Sonny, gets out of prison and finds him and wants to see him. So my source mentions to his DEA handling agent, the underboss is like, wants me to hang out with him more. And the DEA smartly contacts the FBI, organized crime, the Colombo family, and says, I don't know if this source is full of shit, but he says he's got ties to Sonny. Sonny lives like 20 minutes from where I live. Total dumb luck. So it's totally out of my league to be running a source against the underboss. This is way out of my league, except for the fact that the other agents that are way more experienced live in New Jersey, and them trying to get from Jersey to Long Island with Long Island traffic. I mean, the source is going to die before they even get, over the bridge. So I end up basically inheriting the source because I live 20 minutes away. Wow. And so I'm sitting there running a guy who's 6'5", former college football player. This guy could crush my fucking head. My source could crush my head. Like, I remember sitting there like, I don't think this and there's all these rules that the Bureau has. And it goes to show you like these rules go out the window in New York because you're supposed to have 2 agents with you. There's 2 a.m. Your source calls and says, the underboss is going to meet me at such and such club. He wants to talk to me. You don't have time for your partner from New Jersey to come in, come in. So you just go and you do it. So Sonny killed, eventually he admitted on one of the tapes I made or that my source made that, he's killed like, dozens of people. Like everyone knew he was kicked out of the army and during World War II for homicidal tendencies. You got to imagine how homicidal you have to be to get kicked out of the army when you're supposed to go kill Nazis. I mean, it's like yeah, even the Nazis, they don't deserve this. Like, so it's like, and so so we investigated people like that were like, they're not serial killers because the people they killed were all connected to La Cosa Nostra. There was a reason for it, but sometimes the reason was as flimsy as I had one source who, the guy went to his wife's house and went into his wife's house when he was not home, which you may know is a big Italian no-no. It's a sign of disrespect if you enter a man's house when his wife's home and the husband. It's just the perception that you're getting your dick sucked. So it was like a former relationship. So he ends up finding the guy. This was back in the 70s but he confessed to us after he cooperated. He just knocked on the guy's window. He pulled up at like a restaurant, and my source, who was in the administration at that point of the Colombo family, he just goes up and knocks on the window, and the guy's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" He just shoots him in the face in broad daylight. Witnesses everywhere, and just throws the gun in the street. And I was like, "Did anyone ever say anything?" And he laughed. He's like, "No, back then you could just do that kind of thing. No one saw anything back then because they owned the entire neighborhood. It was out in Brooklyn." So you investigated people like that, but never like you'd have to be on like the behavioral analysis unit, the BAU, to do like the profile of like serial killers. But some of that stuff is bullshit anyway, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good work, but
no, that's dude, it's incredibly fascinating. Now, obviously, without obviously mentioning any names, did you ever have a source or somebody that flipped and they decided to cooperate with you and go into these meetings with the Wire and do that, and then they got found out, like, Big Pussy in Sopranos, and you never heard from him again?
No, I always love that part where like the agents in Sopranos, like they like throw his file in the garbage. I'm like, there'd be a bit more paperwork when your source got murdered than throwing the file in the garbage, because you really are responsible for these fucking people. Like, so no, the answer is no, but because, and no disrespect, Sopranos, one of the greatest shows ever, one of my favorite. I actually didn't watch it until I finished my career in organized crime, and it was a constant topic of conversation for wise guys and our sources. It came up on wires all the time, and it made me wonder sometimes what was reflecting what. Were the wise guys reflecting the show or vice versa? And I think there was a lot of that happening. But in real life, if you're really operating your source the way you should, you'll see that stuff coming. There were definitely meetings where we thought there was a possibility that they knew he was cooperating. But we held that information so tight that we didn't, even on the squad, you don't say the source's name. Like, you use their code name. Audible was a code name we had, right? Audible. I'm going to see Audible. Why? Because for all I know, there's a secretary 3 desks away that, is dating somebody who's a Colombo, and they're going to hear you say the person's name, and that's the end of it. So even within the FBI, and we got the New York office is notorious for this, but it's for good reason, in my opinion. Even within the FBI, we didn't like people reading our source documents from other offices of the Bureau. Like, we got into fights with Boston all the time, because Boston had the whole Whitey Bulger thing that happened. And after the Whitey Bulger thing, you don't want your source getting murdered because some agent went rogue. And so even for them to come want to listen to your tapes and read your 302s, your reports, you would find ways not to do it because you just didn't want to trust anybody that didn't need to know, what was going on. And even if they created a reason to know, you'd find a reason why maybe they only need to read half of it or whatever. So you'd see it coming. And in those instances, you'd prepare differently for the meeting. So if possible, you might want to try to move the meeting. You might have them just no show that day. If you're really certain something, you'll create a fake accident. You'll send an agent to go interview somebody so that the guy who's supposed to meet cancels the meeting himself. There's ways you can manipulate. You can manipulate the people playing this game so that you can get what you want in the end without it looking like the source. So the source shows up for the meeting, and now the guy that you think was going to hurt him doesn't show up. So the source looks like he's good because he showed up, and then he calls and says, "What the fuck?" And he says, "No, someone came, to my wife's house with a subpoena. I'm laying low for a couple of weeks. We'll talk 2 weeks." And half these wise guys would just fucking forget 2 weeks later about whatever it is.
Wow.
Constant concern about that.
How many years, Vince, were you in the Bureau?
I did 11, and I did the first 7 were with organized crime, and then I went over to cyber.
And cyber was cyber crimes. It was like white collar shit.
Yeah. So it was non-state sponsored criminal intrusions, which means anytime somebody hacked a network and it wasn't a country like North Korea or China, my squad got it. But the crazy thing is that at that time, the dark web was becoming very popular, and people started opening up these like crazy websites on the dark web selling like kiddie porn, guns, drugs, you name it. And because they were doing it on the dark web, it was essentially impossible for anyone to know where these servers and therefore who these people were.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you too. So just for the listeners, so they know, explain, obviously you don't have to go crazy into it, but explain to the listeners, what exactly is the dark web?
Yep. So the surface web is what I call, what everyone else calls the internet, right? The internet is the surface web, meaning you go to a website, you can look up information.
What we see every day.
What you see every day. And unlike, if you remember in the early days of the internet, people were like, man, it's all anonymous. And then they like open up a website for like child porn and get arrested 10 minutes later. And they're like, how'd this happen? It's like, well, because when you register a domain, www, kittyporn.com, you're registering that domain through a company that's going to ask for information and collect certain information. And then you're putting that website on a computer somewhere that may be in your house, it may be hosted. All that stuff is connected to things that we call attributable. Somewhere along that process, there's going to be some piece of information that you're providing that lets the government know who you are. So finding out who owns abc.com is easy. Like we can arrest those people all day. The dark web is different. The dark web, which is runs on what's called the Onion router, Tor. If you ever heard Tor, that's what it stands for, the Onion router. It's a browser that looks like, if you ever use like old school Netscape or Mozilla, it's an old school kind of browser. The websites look kind of old school too, because it's very slow. But the way that they put those websites on servers, it's all done through multiple layers of encryption, which is why it's called the Onion router. Like if you think of an onion, peeling an onion.
Yeah, right.
So imagine the difference is this. If I send a piece of mail now out from my mailbox, it can essentially be tracked from my mailbox to the recipient, because it's going to go through who picked it up to the main office. It's going to get stamped. It's going to get routed to this other office on a truck, and they could trace it back. The dark web would be like if I sent a piece of mail through like a bird, that just flies through the air. And the package itself is built into a package with 1,000 locks on it. So you can't just rip it open. It's indestructible. And that's how the dark web, in layman's terms, operates, where it's obfuscated, it's hidden amongst the layers of encryption, and the messages and the data itself is encrypted. So when I look at what's going on the dark web, it's all encrypted. The government can't see anything. And here's the kicker. And I love this because it goes to show you how the government sometimes can get. The government designs the dark web. The government created Tor. It was like the U.S. Department of Navy. They created it so that if we had somebody in another country like China who was a spy and they wanted to talk to, let's say, a handler here in the States, they could do so. And if the Chinese government sees their computer, they could never tell who they were talking to. And that's the way it works. Okay. And they didn't think, and this goes back to what I was saying, right? When you have people that come into the government with a very homogenous background, they'll design something like Tor and never think, how could this be used for evil? Whereas people like you or I might say, you know what I'd do if I was a fucking 18-year-old? I'd open up a drug forum and sell drugs on this site. I'd start selling kiddie porn. I'd sell guns. So we create Tor, and then eventually someone comes along and opens up a site called the Silk Road. Ross Ulbricht comes along, and he opens up this site selling. He grew 10 pounds of mushrooms in a cabin in the woods, and as a proof of concept, he built this drug site and then sold the 10 pounds of mushrooms and was like, holy shit, people paid me in Bitcoin, because now that Bitcoin existed, you could pay someone anonymously, which was the first time ever. Like, how would you pay someone for drugs over the internet? PayPal, phone cards, like all that shit's traceable back to a person. Bitcoin came along, and Ross was smart enough to say, wow, so we have the ability to create a website that's anonymous, and we have anonymous money. So he starts selling mushrooms. Then other people join the site. Well, within 2 years, he does like $1.13 billion in drug sales. 1.13 billion. He's just brokering it. He's not like selling it anymore. He just has vendors, and he takes like a 5 or 10% cut of every single sale. So my squad was already actively investigating this when I landed on the squad. And I was new to cyber, so I was still getting my feet under me, like, making the switch from, you want to talk about a big change, I was, big man on campus on OC, because I'd been there now for 7-8 years. I could pick any case I want. My first source was a low-level driver. My last source was on the administration of the Colombo family. And then I leave that because now I'm like, fuck this, I'm getting bored of this. I wanted the computer stuff is where everything's going now. And I have those skills and it's time for me to make the move. I make the move and I totally reset. And I'm sitting there going, shit, was this the right move? Because this is a totally different animal. Now, instead of telling nobody nothing, we're talking to Microsoft and Google and Facebook every day, giving them all sorts of information back and forth that was like blowing my mind. Like I can't believe we're telling them this stuff, but that's the nature of how that works. So this Silk Road case gets taken down, and the agents who were investigating that case leave the bureau, and then I inherit it from that point forward. So I have to work with the Southern District to push the case through trial. So that's how I really became intimately involved in Silk Road 1. And at the same time, the site gets taken down, he's arrested, and Silk Road 2 comes up, and then I become the case agent for Silk Road 2. Since I was now doing Silk Road 1, you kind of become an expert on that. And then that rolls into Silk Road 2 because the site went back up like 13 days later and was actually bigger than it was, in the beginning.
So in your experience of doing the organized crime and then going into the cyber stuff, it almost sounds like the cyber stuff, as crazy as this is to sound, it sounds like the mob stuff was just cut and dry. These guys were doing what they had to do. They were Italian guys, like you said. Some of them we'd want to hang out with and have a glass of wine with, even though they did horrible things. It sounds like the other shit, the cyber stuff, especially on like when you were talking about some of the gross, disgusting stuff, could be even more evil, like even more evil than the Italian shit, right?
Well, the Italians would definitely, like, every time we arrested someone, why don't you go arrest some pedophiles? So yeah, for sure. And
let me ask you a question real quick. I don't want to cut you off. No. How funny were some of the Italians, dude, that you arrested with what they said? Like, did they say shit like, look at that suit, look at those shoes? Did any of them ever say shit like that?
Always. Or they would like, they'd have like a series of medical conditions that were like half made up, and I'd have to take them to the hospital. One guy wanted me to wipe his ass. He literally, I was like, this is as far as I'm going. I was like, if you have to sit in my car with shit in your pants, that's what's happening. He was like 400 pounds. Scopo, I think his name was. No, they were almost all of them were very funny. And they also were very, like I said, charismatic. So, if they were going to talk to you post arrest, you'd have some really fun conversations. The best part was once they cooperated and they started going through. So the first thing you do when they agree to cooperate is they have to go back from the beginning and talk about their entire criminal history. These guys started committing crimes like 13, 14. Sonny committed his first murder in 14. Some of my other sources committed their first homicides in their 20s, but were committing all sorts of other organized crime related crimes back to the 60s. So you'd sit there and they would walk you through. I'm like, you tell them you should write a book. Like, that's why I wish Sonny would have written a book. There's a few documentaries, but the stuff that they would tell you about would be awful, but hysterical. I mean, like I said, if from the outside in, for someone would say, how could you laugh at that? But you're like, I'm sorry, but the fact that this one guy like called someone a blowjob as an insult. And so the response to that was to invite him over the house, shoot him in the head, and then chop his dick off and stick it in his mouth, and then set him on fire in his own car. I don't know. When the guy told me the story, it was actually kind of funny. I don't know how he did it, but he made it funny.
You know what? That's a good segue. But anyway, like I was saying, it seems like for me, it seems like the cyber shit is worse than an Italian thing, but maybe I'm being biased.
It is, because I'll tell you why. And this is the problem everybody has with Ross's sentence, right? I get so much shit because Ross, the guy who ran the Silk Road, was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. And they're like, but Sonny was, Sonny Franzese, when we went to trial with him, he murdered like 15 people and was only given 10 years. Like, but here's the difference. When you go to the internet, when you start doing things on the internet, they scale so big. If the wise guys had the technical smarts that Ross did and other people did, the Italian mafia would be everywhere. It'd be all over the place because the internet gives you that reach into places you never hit before. So Silk Road was doing drug sales all over the world. All over the world. People were shipping heroin from Afghanistan and marijuana from New York City, hashish from Amsterdam. Well, the internet gives you that exposure and that ability to put vendors on from all over the world. So when you do the math, and when the judge did the math and said, these are the things you've been convicted of, and we could prove it because there's an actual digital ledger because it was done all digitally. There's a spreadsheet that shows the amount of volume you did. Well, then all that math translates into 2 life sentences plus 40 years. When you arrested Sonny for murders or Pablo Escobar didn't have a spreadsheet of his narcotics transactions.
Right.
If he did, he would have gotten 100 life sentences.
Right.
And so the blessing of the internet is if you do it right, it gives you a high degree of anonymity. It's hard to find you. The curse of it is once the FBI gets to it, you are done 10 ways to Sunday because the evidence is all there. It's all digital.
The paper trail is digital paper trail.
Yeah.
Is that a fucking hot tub behind you?
Oh yeah, this is a portable one. Yeah. Bring it out in the spring. I highly recommend it, man. It's like it's great. You can move it anywhere you want. It's got its own heater and pump. And the spring, I move it out by the pool. There's a bar outside. I move it to the bar, and then in the summer, I move it to the edge of the pool. And then in the winter, I rotate it back into the house. And I'll go in the hot tub like 3-4 times a week.
Wait, you could sit in that and just watch TV from in there?
Yeah, I go with my son here. You could see it, and then faces the TV. So we watched the new Ghostbusters last weekend. Like, you ever been in the bathtub and you're like, man, I wish I had a TV. Like when you're in the bath, you know what I mean? That's how it came to me. I'm like, how do I make this happen? So I started bringing TV equipment into the bathtub. My wife was like, no, you're not turning this into the living room. Plus, I think she also suspects that I was going to knock one of them in the bathtub when she was in it and end this fucking nightmare of marriage we have. But so I said, well, what alternative? So this hot tub, I think you could see it. You could just
wow, dude.
Yeah.
You gotta send me what manufacturer that is. I want to see that. I want to look at that. All right, so let's get into this. Has been fascinating because time is going by because it's so great, man. The stories and what you did. So now you do all this is what I think is hilarious. We have a mutual friend, by the way, Club Soda Kenny. Love Kenny.
Yeah.
Kenny. So you go from an FBI agent, your law, all those things. You're going after, organized crime. Then you're going after the cyber stuff. And then now during this whole time, because Vinny is now a stand-up comedian, are you thinking during your 11-year stint, stand-up is something I always want to do? Or were you at the tail end of it? You go, I'm going to get into stand-up. Like it was like a later decision.
I don't know about you, and I'm curious what your story is with this, but so I always thought about stand-up comedy. I always watched it on TV when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
Comic Strip Live or whatever. And, I would always get in trouble and the teachers would always say, you're a class clown and, go be a stand-up comic. I always took it as an insult because I didn't know anything about stand-up comedy. And being first generation, I don't want to blame this on my parents because I don't know now in hindsight, but the idea that I could have said to them, that's the route I want to go. I would just imagine them thinking about the boat they sat on from Italy to here and all the aspirations and then being like, but why? There's nothing else you want to do? Like, that's probably putting more on it than they would because I think they'd support me no matter what. But I had a very overachieving older brother who was like a year and a half older. When I say overachieving, he's a brain surgeon. Like that doesn't get more overachieving, right? So he cast a large shadow.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So he was the smart one. He was the one saying, Vinny, you shouldn't throw rocks at cop cars. You shouldn't go vandalize buildings. And I'm like, Sabino, what do you know? I'm living my life. And so I think what I thought was that at some point I realized I was going to end up getting in some serious trouble. And I was told that I had potential and that I was just academically lazy. And I started to think about focusing my energy towards like more positive things. And once that started picking up with the school stuff, and like when I got to college, like law, I fell in love with law. And a teacher pulled me aside and said, well, you're obviously going to go to law school. And I'm thinking, if you knew me, you would never say it. But they didn't know my history. They just knew me who I was then.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I have a chance to basically forget about my fucked up past. And now I'm the smart guy in class. Now I'm the leader. Now I'm the teacher's assistant. Like, how the hell did that happen?
Yeah.
So the comedy thing was like, I didn't know anybody in show business. I didn't know how comedy clubs worked. It was like watching a movie. You know, of course you might want to be in a movie, but if you don't know anything. So I thought that time of my life, I missed it because, you know, I was just getting older, and I said, well, I would always love to, but it's gone. And then I leave, well, I was still in the FBI. There's clubs right in my area where I live in Long Island. There's three big clubs, you know, Governors in Levittown, you know, Brokerage and McGuire's, and Brokerage is right down the street from me. So I go there with my wife from time to time, and I always see the owner there and his wife, you know, wave hello. And one day I go there with a mutual friend of ours, and he knows him, and he introduces me to him. Now I'm still at the bureau. And so, you know him, he's suspicious of me. I'm suspicious of him. I always joke that wouldn't it be great if everyone finds out like 10 years from now, this was just the longest undercover operation in history. And I really am just an FBI agent who went undercover as a comic for 10 years. But so we end up becoming friends though. Like we end up having these conversations while I'm there. And he's the one who kind of pushed me through our conversations. He's like, hey, and we had an MC didn't show up one night, and he just said, you go do it. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. I'm like, you know, so I went up and I did it. And he said, you know, what'd you think? I was like, it was awesome. It was like fucking awesome. He was like, you're good at it. He goes, you should do it again. I'm like, yeah. So I showed up a week later with my wife for dinner to watch somebody. And he walks over and he's like, all right, you're up in 5 minutes. And I was like, I'm here for dinner. Like, I'm not going on stage. He's like, just do like 2 minutes, just do whatever. So he kept pushing me to do it. And
wow,
I had just left the bureau, so I could do it because I couldn't go on stage when I was an FBI agent. I had just left the bureau. And then every time I went, he would push me to go on stage. And then it became totally an addiction. Again, when I talk about us living in a simulation, none of this makes sense, right? None of this, the fact that I still had a chance to do stand-up, right, after deciding that I chose a path and that's the way life is. And then at 37, that opportunity opens back up again. How does that happen? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Obviously I knew your story, that you were FBI agent and then that you became you went into stand up and from Long Island. I had no idea that you were actually just going there to hang out, to have dinner or to watch another comedian. And next thing you know, the guy's going, oh, you're going up and you're doing time and shit like that, which is, dude, that's so amazing. How long have you been doing stand up for now?
I guess since I left in 2015. So,
about 7 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably maybe 16. Maybe I started it within a year after I left at most.
Yeah. And then you had to deal with the COVID shit too, which doesn't help. So yeah, man. But no, that's dude, that's really fascinating. And that's such a great story. And knowing all of the pieces, I know why a guy like you, because when I first met you and then you said something, and I think we talked about something and we were in the green room and you go, yeah, that's why it's a simulation. And I was like, what? And you were like, yeah, no, dude, this is the Matrix. Like, this is a simulation. And then I thought you were going to be, and you weren't fucking around. Now, let me ask you this, because this is fascinating. I think we're going to have to maybe do another one of these later in the future or something, because it's so fascinating. So here's the deal. Not that I'm have a ton of money or anything, but as your career moves forward and as your career goes up, you make more money. And I'm going, all right, well, now that I'm making money, I want to be able to do a couple of things or invest a couple of things to have that make me more money. Right. Yeah. So I was talking to I have a finance guy that I recently got. I love the guy. He's at a big firm in New York. And I said, hey, what's the deal with Bitcoin and Bitcoin and Bitcoin? He actually said, you know what he said? I thought he was going to just be like, hey, let's go with the sure shot. Let's go. But he goes, listen, if I'm being honest, it's early. He goes, it's a great question because all of our clients are asking us. Yep. It's a great question. So he goes, listen, how about this? If you took a little bit of money and you said to yourself, whatever happens with this little bit of money happens, right? Exactly. So let's say, 3, 5, 10 grand. And you're going to take that. You're going to go, hey, I'm going to put that in Bitcoin. And I'm mentally going to say to myself, that money might be gone.
Right.
and just let it sit there. He's like, I'm not going to tell you to not do that. He goes, to be honest, he goes, I just don't want to tell you. So, these finance guys.
I know he's nervous because if it goes bad, he's supposed to be the one setting you straight.
Right. These finance guys that you hire, they want to look at it like, hey, I'm helping you and your family. And if this is a wild card, I don't know. But he didn't say no. He was like, see what happens. Awesome. But what's your you invested in Bitcoin, correct?
Yeah. So two things. One, and I mean this sincerely. First of all, it's great to hear that because I have a money guy, and it's the same money guy that my brother uses, and I love them, but they're very skeptical of it. And I find myself in the position of having to be like an advocate and honestly educate them. And your guy too, if he's looking for free time, I'm happy to get on the phone with him and talk to him about how I got into it and what I know about it. And again, you have to understand, I came into it from the perspective, there was nobody more skeptical of Bitcoin than me. The entire websites we investigated, they ran on Bitcoin. So we're talking about child porn sites, drug sites, gun sites. So I was incredibly skeptical in 2011, 12. When I first learned about Bitcoin, I'm like, what kind of Ponzi scheme bullshit is this? The difference between me and a lot of other people is I, first of all, started getting involved with it on a technical level early on. And I started mining Bitcoin. And I'll talk to you about that, what that means in a second. But I started using it, transferring stuff to myself. How does it work? How does it function? Where are the vulnerabilities in this that somebody can rip me off? Yeah. What I realized was that I went from hating this thing and being entirely skeptical to realizing that that I was witnessing something that will be as at least as impactful on the world as the internet is, at least as impactful as the internet. So I have two things sitting behind this camera you can't see. Is one's the Constitution of the United States and one is Satoshi's white paper. Satoshi's the guy who invented Bitcoin, and the white paper is like a technical document that explains how it works. And the reason why I have them next to each other, because in my mind, those two documents will actually be, in one day, will be looked at the same in terms of importance to humanity for individual rights and freedom. And that's a bold fucking statement. I say that as a lawyer. I know what's in the Constitution, and I know how different the Constitution is. What Bitcoin did was it was the first time in history that somebody solved a series of very, very complicated issues with creating digital money. Because the problem with digital money is if it's a digital anything, it could be copied and it could be exploited and it could be manipulated. And without getting super technical, what Satoshi built was a system of checks and balances, much like the Constitution, where it's incorruptible. The Constitution is more corruptible than Bitcoin is because Bitcoin's all based on math. So when you say I invested in it, what happened was in 2012, convinced that Bitcoin was evil somehow because it was being used, it was early adopted by people using it for bad shit. I started to mine Bitcoin. And what it means when you mine Bitcoin is every time you make a Bitcoin transaction and you send, let's say I send you 0.001 Bitcoin, that transaction gets sent out to the world of people who have computers that are validating whether that's legit. So it's not like a bank where a bank just says it's legit and that's one entity. JP Morgan says that you have $500 in the bank, therefore you have $500. Bitcoin works very much differently, where the whole world has to agree based on what's called the ledger or the blockchain that you have $500. How that works is when you send the transaction, you're doing what's called signing it. It's a digital signature that unless you actually own it, would be impossible for you to guess or hack. It's not like a password like, Bon Jovi 27. It's like a password that's like, 50 something digits long. That's impossible to create. When you send that out, the rest of the computing world, the miners, these machines will essentially take that and say, this guy's trying to send 0.001 Bitcoin. Let's see if he's bullshit or not. And they go through and they use math to validate that you rightfully own that from the beginning of time. So imagine every time someone handed you a $5 bill, that instantaneously, the minute you handed it to you, you said, hold on a second. You took that $5 bill and you looked at the serial number on it. And then in your brain, you were able to go back and say, so Vinny's handed me $5 before Vinny James had it, before James Paul had it, before Paul Mike had it, then Samara had it. And you traced it all the way back to the mint, to show that it rightfully moved. When you took that $5, there is no way that's a counterfeit $5 bill. There's no way that you didn't own it because Everything leads up to you. And so every single time there's a Bitcoin transaction, it literally goes back to the beginning of time, 2009, of when it first was created or when it was created, and shows it moving from address to address to show that you rightfully own it. And the miners, part of what they're doing is validating that. They're making sure that it's legit. These machines that mine, they started out where you could mine with just a regular computer and you got paid for that. Think about it. So you're processing transactions. Well, you deserve something for your time. So I bought a Bitcoin miner in 2012 because the way it works is it gets harder and harder to use regular computers. And now you have to buy a specialized machine to do it. And I bought this Bitcoin miner because I wanted to learn about how this actually works. And there's no better way to learn. It's like explaining stand-up and doing stand-up, two different things, right? Like if you want to know what stand-up's like, you can watch 100 videos, but until you step foot on a stage and you pull that mic out of the stand, it's basically nothing. You're not going to learn anything. So I buy this Bitcoin miner and I'm broke at the time because I'm working on government salary. My wife refuses to leave the DA's office because she wants to be poor forever. So we're both stuck in this. Like, I'm not leaving the FBI. She's not leaving the DA's office. We're just gonna be poor forever. We decided that our kids' teeth will be all fucked up because we can't afford braces. So I sneak. I buy a Bitcoin miner and I put it in my back TV room, my old house, tiny house, and I turn this bitch on, and it's like running 3 hair dryers. It's loud. It's kicking off heat. My back room got so hot, the cats were like having heat strokes in the back room. And here's the funny part. This is when Bitcoin was at maybe $100 a Bitcoin. No, 60 to $100. I have to look it up per Bitcoin. At the time, I was making per day almost the exact amount I was spending in electricity. I had one of these at first, and then I got addicted, and I had 3 of them. I moved them out to the garage. I was making about $10 a day in Bitcoin as my profit, but I was spending about $10 a day in electricity. Using the miners. So I held on to a lot of that. I sold some too, and I made some mistakes along the way because Bitcoin has a way of humbling you. You buy it, then you get scared and you sell it, and then you regret it. I did that with a certain amount back when it was $100-something. But when I went back at the math and I looked at the Bitcoin that I have and how much I was making per day now and what it's valued at, I was making about $16,000 a day in my garage. $16,000 a day. And I also learned something very valuable. I mentioned this on stage, which is that when guys or girls, take the leap and start investing, when Bitcoin's down, it's going to be your Bitcoin investment. And when it's up, it's our Bitcoin investment. Your wife she's going to give you shit when it's down. And believe me, when it went up, because she thought I sold it all, and I did sell some of it when I bought the house and everything, but I did keep a bunch. She was like, we need to sell this. That was when it was at like, 3,000 a coin. And then when it shot up, my wife's like, oh, did you hear the news? I'm like, oh yeah, casually. Because of course I track it 24/7. And so I mined even in my new house when I moved for a while as well. And I took the heat from the Bitcoin miners. I connected the ductwork and I was heating my house with these computers that were making me money. It was the fucking greatest thing. Loud as shit, but it was in the basement. So what I would say to you is on the Bitcoin side about the investment, I don't call it an investment, but from your perspective, I guess what you're saying. I call it, I'm trading in my shitty fiat currency for currency that I believe is the future. I believe with hyperinflation, it's already here. Everyone's in denial about it. I went to McDonald's yesterday. It was like $52. I'm like, $52 for McDonald's for my family. I'm like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, it should be like, remember it was like 13?
Yeah, $13. Bitcoin is anti-inflationary. There's only 21 million Bitcoin that'll ever be created, ever, period. Unlike the US dollar, where it's like the fucking toilet paper machine, 1.3 trillion. Well, as you know, right, basic economic principle, the more of something that's created, the less valuable it is. It's why we're seeing inflation. I always remind people, the cost of McDonald's didn't go up. The value of my dollar got weaker. The cost of McDonald's stayed the same. The price of it, the value of my dollar is weaker. It takes more of it to get the same fucking thing in the end. They're not giving me more burgers. It's the same amount of shit.
Now, wait a minute. So going back to the Bitcoin thing, when you said there's going to be 26 million, 20 million, that they're already, it's already there. They're already out there.
We're about we're about at, if I remember correctly, 18 million have been created already, because it's designed to give out a lot in the beginning and less every 4 years. It's called a halving event, where the reward for figuring out this mathematical computation that the miners work on, and that's a separate conversation, but the reward gets cut in half. So it used to be 25 Bitcoin. If you solve this math problem, you get 25 Bitcoin. Then it went to 12.5 and so on and so forth. It's going to get down to nothing. So most 18 million Bitcoins already out there. 4 million of that is estimated lost, because you got to remember, in the early days, like I used to, when I was at the bureau, when we were dealing in Bitcoin, like if a wallet had like 0.1 in it, you just like throw the, get rid of it. It was worth like a penny. 0.1 now is a lot of fucking money. I don't know what it is. It's like 10 grand now.
What's
like,
a whole Bitcoin cost now?
40. We're at 40 this morning, 42. And it was peaked at 69. And this is what's scary about Bitcoin. And I tell this to Bob Kelly when I did a show with him out in Jim Thorpe, PA, and we were having this discussion, is everybody feels like they're late to Bitcoin. That's the nature of it. When I started mining Bitcoin at $100, I was convinced I'd missed the boat. I just did it because I wanted to learn, and I was like, whatever. If I can break even, then it doesn't cost me anything. Everybody thinks that they missed the boat. When Bitcoin hit $1, I'll show you posts on the internet that people are like, oh, I fucking blew it. I sold them. All I have is 700 Bitcoin left. There's a post of a guy like that. All I have is 700. I'm such an idiot. 700 Bitcoin. You're like a gazillionaire, so everybody feels that way. So I got another buddy into Bitcoin years ago, and I put 4 miners in his house. And I said, you're not mining or buying Bitcoin for what the value is today. If you buy Bitcoin today, it's going to go up. It's going to go down. Buy it for at least 2 years in advance. Make yourself a commitment that you're not going to sell it for 2 years in advance, because 2 years is enough time to see the ebbs and flows of it. And you're going to look like a genius when it hits 100K, which is going to, I'm convinced, in the next 6 months. And you're going to look like a bum when it drops, when it retraces 30%. But if you hold it, it's called hodling, HODL, from a post years ago of a guy who was like, I'm not fucking selling my Bitcoin, I'm hodling. He misspelled it and it took off. If you hold your Bitcoin for 2 years, I tell everybody, there's been no 2 year stretch of time where anyone's owned Bitcoin and it's gone down in value. You can't find the 2 year niche of time where that's happened.
Right.
But the people that get into trouble are the people that overextend themselves, buy a bunch, and they're thinking
scared.
They're going to sell it in 3 months, and then they get scared or they go under and they sell at a loss. Mm-hmm. And those are called weak hands. We, jokingly, lettuce hands, right? Whereas diamond hands are the hands you want. Like the diamond hands are you buy it. And like for me, I've been through so many 30% retraces. Like I'm not selling my Bitcoin. I know the technology. I know what it is. I've seen where we're going as a civilization, and it's Bitcoin. And you're not going to be able to fucking, I don't care if it hits $10,000. I'm not selling it, because I know that in my lifetime, it's going to hit 1 million. It's going to hit 2 million of Bitcoin. I know that in my lifetime, it's going to happen.
So you think that if I was to buy a Bitcoin today for 42K and
buy a part of one, you don't have to buy a whole one.
Right. But for example,
for math purposes,
for math purposes, I buy 42K today. I buy a Bitcoin and it goes up to 200 tomorrow. You're saying to stay, don't get out, stay.
Well, no. So I would say to anybody at certain points, it's okay to take some money off the table.
Sure.
Like take 50K out, pay some bills, get those braces for your kid with the snaggle tooth.
Yeah.
I don't, and it's all about what you can,
I'm already paying for braces, but go ahead.
I have a friend, I won't mention name, but I have someone very close to me who got into it kind of later and knew that I was into it for a while, and eventually was like, fucking, I'm getting into it. And they started to do the trading route. Like, I'm going to sell high and buy low. And they're slowly coming to the realization that timing the market is so difficult that it's actually less stress and just as profitable just to sit on it. And so if it hits a certain point, and you're like, I'm going to take a little bit of my initial investment out, great. Now you take that 50K out, everything's gravy now. You've just paid for your initial investment, and you could lose all of it tomorrow, and you didn't lose a dime because that was all profit. Let it go. The big questions are things like regulation and how it's going to, how it presents a threat to the federal government. And it does to fiat currency. It does. They're just starting to understand that. When I used to give speeches on this at the Bureau, I used to meet with like banks and shit as an FBI agent. They'd laugh at me. I'd be talking about Bitcoin and they're like, oh, it's imaginary money. Now all the fucking banks want in. They all want in on this one way or the other. They're selling it. They're taking it. They're incorporating it. And as that institutional money comes into it, that when you find out that it's not just Tesla and SpaceX and that it's Walmart that's putting it on their balance sheet and it's Amazon and it's Google, that's when the next bull run's going to happen. And one of those companies is going to announce probably this year, and then it's going to be all out again. And it's going to go from, 50K to 150K, and then it'll retrace like it does. But look, you're young. I'm young. You're talking about for your future, for your kids. To me, it's it's diversification's great. And, investing in traditional things is great, but this is something that is a once in a multiple lifetime type of invention. It's like the internet of money. And
sure.
And so no one's going to convince me. And if you think about the early days of the internet, it's a gimmick. People want to go into the brick and mortar stores. They want to feel the TV. Fuck that.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of them. I was wrong when somebody said
here,
everybody's going to be, I remember a buddy of mine who worked at a very, very big record company. He goes, TV's going away. TV's going away. Everybody's going to be watching things on their phones. Everything's going to be, and I'm going, no, dude, no, it's TV, and listen, you still watch your TV, but it's through streaming. It's all going. Yeah. Now, let me ask you this one question, man. This has been unbelievably fascinating podcast. Truly, truly one of the most fascinating. No, it's unbelievable, dude. Just listening to this shit and because it sounds like we came from the same background as for when we were younger. And then obviously we go different ways, but now here we are. Is there another cryptocurrency that you would recommend now? Because all of these, no.
So here's the thing, and you said this earlier, and I have to watch because you said about crypto. So there's a thing called Bitcoin maximalists, and I guess I'm one of them. The Bitcoin maximalist is someone that looks at Bitcoin different than every other crypto that's out there, and I truly believe that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make money with Ethereum. I own some Ethereum, but Ethereum is like the fucking, Rwanda Constitution next to the United States Constitution. Like, it's kind of got some of the similarities to it, but the fundamentals of Ethereum, the fundamentals of Cardano are shit. And there's a lot of technical reasons for that. The number one thing you have to consider when you're looking at any crypto is there a finite amount and who has control over that? If there is an infinite amount, I'm already invested in a shit coin. It's called the US dollar. I'm forced to be invested in that. There's an infinite amount of new money. They've created more money in the last 2 years than the previous fucking 200 years, right?
Right.
I want something that I know is anti-inflationary by design. When we hit, and 21 million is going to take to the year 2140 to hit. So this isn't happening because, like I said, it drips off. But what happens is when this is everything Satoshi created, and nobody knows who Satoshi is, by the way, which is the other reason I love it. There is no CEO of Bitcoin. Nobody owns Bitcoin. There's no company you can call. He can't be found out to be not woke and be fucking canceled, which I love. Ethereum, Vitalik, a guy runs Ethereum. The guy could be a pedo for all I fucking know. I don't want my money. I don't want my life savings attached to something that I could find that the guy's a pedophile 3 years from now, or he's not woke and he gets canceled and everyone dumps Ethereum. And so when you look at all these other coins, you have to stack them up against them. They're not the same. They're trying to be the same. There's 18,000 other coins out there. They're trying to be like Bitcoin, but what they do is they get pumped up because they claim to be faster and more green. That's not the metric of sound money. I want my money to be secure. My money can't be green and secure. The miners that protect Bitcoin use a ton of electricity, but that's like saying, and this analogy has been drawn by people smarter than I am. That's like saying, how does the U.S. government protect the dollar? We protect the dollar through our military. That's why we have value in our dollar. We have aircraft carriers, we have jet fighters. If someone fucks with us, we can end them. And so when we say, hey, this is the value, if someone comes after and tries to steal our value and wreck our economy, we can defend that with our aircraft carriers and our jets. I don't give a shit if a tank is green. I don't want a green tank. I don't want a tank that shuts down when it stops and has to restart, right? I want a tank with endless rounds that's impenetrable. And that's how I want my money. I want my money bulletproof. But Bitcoin has been attacked by the government and by nation states. When China, who was running almost 50% of the Bitcoin miners in the world. So think of Bitcoin miners like soldiers. They took half the soldiers and they shut them down, which was an attack on Bitcoin. Bitcoin, everyone was like, shit, what's going to happen? Is someone going to take over the Bitcoin network? Is someone going to fuck with the ledger and start taking money that doesn't belong to them? It wasn't even a blip on its radar. In fact, as of yesterday, we've now surpassed all the Bitcoin mining that they took off the grid. We've now rebuilt. The world has come back and rebuilt. So with those other coins like Ethereum and Cardano, they don't have that. And I don't know about you, but I'll fuck around with those other coins because it's like a roulette wheel. It's like gambling. It's like, whatever. I've already agreed that I'm going to lose this money, but I'm talking about my life savings.
You're talking about longevity, man.
Yeah. I want to know that my money for my kid, like I got my daughter into Bitcoin. She waitresses. She takes a certain percent she puts into Bitcoin. I sleep at night knowing that she's not going to wake up and her wallet's going to be empty tomorrow. Because the fundamentals are that strong with Bitcoin that I know that anything, unless the internet disappears, which would mean the end of the world anyway at this point, right? That the internet's not here. We're back to monkeys with sticks, right?
Yeah.
So other than that, I know that the network's been attacked endlessly, and that it's actually more beneficial for people who attack the network to just join the network because they'll make more money joining the network. And that's the difference. So I would say stay away from those other ones. Those are the ones that you should look at. Bitcoin, believe it or not, you should look at like your savings, and Ethereum and all those other ones. That's your gambling money.
Like that's like almost like your stocks, going up and down. And this one, it's funny because when I was talking to my finance guy, I was talking to my wife. I was like, something, what? I think I'm going to do something because, it was one of those days where my wife is like, well, we need to sit down and have an adult conversation about all this shit, and when you do the,
I hate that.
When you do the fucking, you got to go over everything, all your in life insurance and
I hate that.
Yeah. Life insurance and all that shit. And we're sitting down and we're, going over the finances. And I was like, I think I'm going to, invest in Bitcoin or, put my money in. And the reason why I said Bitcoin was because Bitcoin to me seems like the OG that's just still there. It's like if I was going to buy now, I think in the future, and this is just my opinion. Okay.
Yeah.
I think in the future, Vin, I think I'm going to get an electric car. And I think that electric cars will catch up.
100% agree with you.
But for now, if I'm going to go electric, I'm getting a Tesla. And the reason why is because I've seen people that had Teslas in 2012, 13, when it came out. And I see buddies of mine that have it now. It's just steady Eddie. It's just always is. Now, I talked to my Lexus guy because I have an older Lexus. I said, hey, oh yeah, that's coming in a couple of years. It's like, listen, all right, well, there's gonna be some kinks and there's gonna be some fucking wrinkles in that.
Oh yeah.
So if I'm going electric, I'm gonna do that. So I totally agree. Listen, brother, this has been truly one of the most insightful, interesting podcasts I've done on the Virzi Effect. I can't wait for everybody to see it. Also, where can people follow you and your stand-up career, your website, your dates, all that stuff?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter. I'm Proof of Work 1. Somebody took Proof of Work original, so I'm pissed. So I'm Proof of Work, the number 1. And then I have a podcast that's officially going to get kicked off this week called Vinny's Proof of Work Podcast. Where we're going to talk about true crime, basically the things we covered today. I mean, honestly, I should steal this episode from you and throw it on there. but Bitcoin, true crime, organized crime, cyber crime, ransomware stuff, stand-up comedy, of course. The first episode's in the can. I had the first episode's what's the FBI Academy really like? So some behind-the-scenes stories about our experience at the FBI Academy, including one of the co-hosts for that show is a friend of mine who got fired halfway through the academy for shenanigans and was gracious enough to come on and talk about it. Shuli Edgar's on that podcast as well. So that's going to drop this week, the Vinny's Proof of Work podcast. But you can go to Twitter for now, Proof of Work 1, and you'll find all sorts of information. And then, where I'm showing for, where I'm going to be at that weekend, where I'm going to be performing, I'll throw that up there as well. But yeah, thanks, man.
No, of course, guys. Check out that new podcast, which is coming out. Check out Vinny. I'm sure we'll do another podcast sometime in the future to touch this. Maybe even do like it'd be good as if we did a little bit of like a Bitcoin. You know what I'll do is once I throw some money over there, I'll we'll go over it again. So thank you so much for being here, guys. As far as my dates, you can go to paulvirzi.com. I will be at the Fairfield Comedy Club February 4th and 5th. I will be at the Improv in Pittsburgh, one night only, Thursday night, one show only, Pittsburgh Improv February 24th. I have Austin coming up. I have Tampa coming up. I have Providence, Rhode Island. Go to paulvirzi.com. Check out my other podcast I co-host with Bill Burr, Anything Better, and check out my YouTube channel, guys. This has been another great episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did, and I will see you guys next week. Take care.